What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back. Today we're talking about the meta. The new ban list is finally here and oh boy did we just get a really good ban list. Now Konami finally decided to put the nail in the coffin in Ishizu Tearlaments, but that doesn't really mean that we're kinda out of the tier 0 format already, because from one tier 0 format to another, Kashtira is here to take over, and some people might say that Konami did this just to push more sales for Photon Hypernova, and Kashtira is going to be one heck of an expensive deck right now. But now let's see exactly what changed in the meta because of this, because it's not only that Ishizu tier got hit really hard and they're going to go down the list. No, it's not just that, because Ishizu tier had a tendency to be really big counter for a lot of really good decks, but just because of the existence of the deck in the format, mainly the Ishizu cards to be honest, a lot of decks could not really function, and all of those decks are now back in the game. So now we're going to take a look at the top 10 decks that we think are going to be the most represented down the road. If you think any other decks are going to be really good, comment down below. Let's have a discussion to see exactly what's going to be good in the following format, because the format just beginning. We don't really know what's going to be playable aside from possibly Kashtira being the best deck, but everything else is up in the air. So now, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the list. Number 10, Floowandereeze. Now, this deck got a really big hit as well, so losing Barrier Statue, what does that change for the deck? It does lose a really big win condition, and it loses a really big unfair part of the deck, but it still has D-Shifter, which is still a really powerful card, and the deck is fine on its own, to be honest. It didn't lose anything like consistency, it just lost a really big unfair win condition that the deck had, so it's definitely a lot weaker than before, but that does not mean the deck is not playable. The deck is still really good, and if you're not prepared for it, or if you're playing a deck that loses to D-Shifter, you might as well get screwed when you play against Flounder player, especially now that you will be expecting to see it even less without the Barrier Statue, but I'm pretty sure some people are still going to be dedicated to the deck and are going to try to make it work for the following format, so be on the lookout for this deck even now, because I'm sure it's not going anywhere yet. Number 9, Ishizu Tearlaments. Now, how have the mighty fallen? So this deck, even though it looks like it got completely butchered in the ban list, which it did, it basically reminds me of the time Dragon Rulers got hit really hard, that does not mean the deck is completely out of the picture yet. Yes, it's really weak compared to what it was, but it's still a decent deck just because of how many broken effects it has. It's nothing like the tier 0 that it used to be a couple days ago, but I'm sure a lot of people are still going to try to make this deck work, because Yu-Gi-Oh players just enjoy trying to make the so-called dead archetypes work, especially right after they get hit. If people realize that the deck is not really worth it, they're gonna drop it, yes, but at least for the first few weeks of the following format, you can expect to see this deck even just a little bit more than you think, just because people are experimenting with the deck. The deck can still do a lot of really cool plays, it's just that it is not nearly as consistent as it used to be. The lag factor is there much more than before, with all the names being hit to 1, except of course your Rhino Heart, means that you're not going to be able to hit them every single mill consistently. The Ishizu cards all going to 1, maybe they're worth playing, maybe they're not, we'll see down the road, because these cards always required something with them to be able to work, so once they're all at 1, it kind of becomes inconsistent. If you see just one Keldo or one Mudora in your hand, they don't really do anything, unless you had an Ajido or a Kelbeck. So yeah, this deck is not nearly as strong as it used to be. It's still a decent deck in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's going to disappear off the face of the earth, we'll have to wait and see, but I still believe that because of the OCG2, that even though this deck, even though we can get hits really hard, it can still be played in some capacity. Number 8, Gishki Spright. Now, Spright did get a hit as well, but the thing is, Spright as an engine, I feel like it's still really good, even without Elf. So Gishki, with a new support from the Photon Hypernova set, they did get some really good cards, and they have insane synergy with Spright, so even though you don't have Elf and you cannot do some really big plays, you can still go for those Spright plays to go for a gigantic Spright, get some disruptions on the board, use your Swap Frog to get more cards. You can still get access to Toad, because Ronin is banned, but not Toad, so this card is still really summonable even without Ronin Toadin. So I feel like Gishki Spright, it's a deck that, even though it's a ritual deck and it does feel like a little bit weak, with the new cards it kind of mitigates the amount of neg you do when you do some rituals, and with a Spright you give it a really big power boost to actually make it into a good strategy. Number 7, Mathmech. Now we're going into territory of decks that kind of disappeared off the face of the earth because of the Ishizu cards, and Mathmech is definitely one of them. The reason this deck was at one point really good and it completely disappeared was because of the Ishizu cards. Of course, when you have your Super Factorial and your opponent has a Keldo or a Mudora in the graveyard, the trap card is completely dead, you cannot do anything with it, so it was really difficult to play the deck properly because of the Ishizu cards. But now that we're not going to be seeing Ishizu Tearlaments so often anymore, Mathmech Mathmech is a deck that can again try to take the spot because it's a really good deck. It's a deck that with a few cards can do so many different plays. It can run a million of hand traps because the deck doesn't really need too many cards in order to function. So in a format now that we're not forced to play so many graveyard disruption hand traps, we're not forced to play bestials in every single strategy, or cards like Meister, Crow, and Ghostbill. We can play a plethora of other hand traps like Ash Blossom, Nibiru, Imperm. So a deck like this can utilize all of them, and Mathmech on its own, it's already a really good archetype, and now that there's not so much graveyard disruption, the deck can actually be really good again. Number 6, Tri-Brigade. This is another deck that falls into the same category as Mathmech. It's a really good deck, but again, a deck that relies so much on having resources in the graveyard in order to even use its link plays. With cards like Mudora and Keldo being so popular in the previous format, the deck could not really function because you had all your graveyard set up, and then the moment you threw your Tri-Brigade on the field to try to go for a Shrike play or something like that, you got 3 cards shuffled back into the deck, and suddenly your graveyard was completely empty and you had nothing to banish for your Tri-Brigade effect. So it was something that was stopping the deck from being played at all, but now, similarly to Mathmech, the deck is still going to be really good once again, and it can play with a lot of engines, with a lot of different stuff because of how generic the Tri-Brigades really are, so we can see exactly what people decide to do with the deck. The creativity for the format is going to be off the roof, especially at the start, so a lot of people are experimenting with old and new stuff to make sure that they know exactly what's going on. Number 5, Sword Soul. Now, we had Sword Soul in the previous list, and with all these stuff getting hit, I feel like Sword Soul is just getting better. Sword Soul was always a good deck. It was not a deck that got hit completely hard by the Isizu cards because you didn't rely on the graveyard. So a deck like this, it's only going to get better the more the other decks get hit. Yes, of course, Kashtira is going to basically replace Isizu Tier as the new top dog of the meta, but Sword Soul, I feel like it's a deck that the more people played, the better the deck becomes, because Sword Soul is a deck that the pilots are usually amazing. It's a deck that people don't really pick up because it's not what it used to be. It's not like the tier 1 best deck that it used to be, but the people who play the deck are the ones that really love the deck, so you know that they know the ins and outs of the deck. So when you're playing against Sword Soul, more often than not, you're playing against someone who knows everything about the deck, so they know exactly how to navigate the format. They are going to playtest against a lot of Kashtira decks, so they know how to beat the decks, and Sword Soul is a deck that with one of those 1-2 card combos, similarly to Mathmech, you can play so many tech cards to beat the meta, so it's not impossible to be able to main deck even cards to be able to beat tier 0 decks. It's just as Isizu tier was just so explosive, it was basically impossible to beat no matter what you main deck. But Kashtira, I hope it's not like that. I hope, even though it will be the best deck, it's not going to be nearly as broken as Isizu tier was, because if it is, then I feel like Konami, again, they did something really good, but then we just fall into something really bad right after, which I really hope doesn't happen, but we'll have to wait and see for that. Number 4, Spright Runick. Now, Pure Spright is completely dead, I would feel like. Without Elf, Pure Spright, it doesn't really have the oof it had before, because Elf was the card that was able to recycle back all your resources. It was the reason you were able to go into Toad so easily, even though Ronin Toad is banned. But now, Spright is a deck that has to be splashed with other things, not playable. It's still a really powerful engine on its own, but and when you combine with other stuff that has synergy with it, it can still be really good. And we all know how good Runicks are on their own, and when you combine them with a Spright engine, similarly to Gishki, you give them the more power they need in order to be able to work, and Runicks are a deck that can out-resource you so quickly, being able to draw 3 cards with a field spell every single turn, get around your resources, banish the top cards of your deck. Yeah, we all know how a Runick works with Spright. It's basically the same thing as before, it just doesn't have Elf, but it's still really good. Now, moving on to the top 3, I feel like these 3 decks are the ones we're going to see the most. Maybe there will be some changes, especially for the number 3 slot. I feel like it's a little bit questionable, but I put as number 3 Labyrinth. Now, Labyrinth is basically the new trap deck that everyone's going to play. We start with Altergeist, we went to Eldritch, and now we have Labyrinth. Labyrinth is the deck that has more consistent plays than Eldritch, and it can do a lot with all the trap cards it has in its arsenal, because now that we don't have so many Isizu tiers, the deck is not going to be forced to play Backrow Hate. Some people were even maining Soul Drain in order to play around that, which was terrible against other matchups, but now that without Isizu tier being so popular, we don't really have to main deck such specific cards in order to beat the meta. We have to main deck other cards, like for example Goes in a Match, which is really good against Kashtira, but Goes in a Match is really good against a lot of other decks too, unlike Soul Drain, which was very specific. So Labyrinth can still play all the trap cards it can in order to be able to fight the meta, and it's a consistent deck that gets access to its starters very easily, especially with the support from Photon Hypernova with Big Welcome Labyrinth, who have 3 more starters. So the deck is consistent, it has the room to play any trap card it wants, it has really good plays when it's trying to snowball, because the extra effects you get when you disrupt your opponent with the normal trap cards, being able to destroy cards on the hand, recycle cards on the graveyard, set other traps on the deck can do a lot. So I feel like this is going to be the third best deck. Maybe it's going to fall down a little bit if people figure out something else that's better, but for now I feel like the deck is going to be really, really good. Number 2, Branded Bestial. Now, Branded is a deck that used to be the best deck, and then it kind of faced off the face of the earth, but now it's going to become really, really good again. We did get a new Bestial card, a new support in general for the deck in Photon Hypernova, and even though Bestials, yes, are not going to be just as powerful as they used to be because of Ishizu Tear, when you play them in the deck that you don't really rely on your opponent to use them, because when you use them as hand traps, you don't really want to banish your own cards, but in a deck like this, you use cards like Lubellion to be able to facilitate fusion summons. So yeah, Branded Bestial is going to be a really, really good deck. The Despia cards are also really powerful. Everything in this deck is pure gas. You're able to go with 1 card plays with Branded Fusion, and nothing in the deck got hit. Branded Fusion is still at 3, so you know that the deck is going to be really, really good. But for the number 1 slot, I'm pretty sure everyone saw this coming. We have Kashtira. Now, hopefully, we did not leave one tier 0 format to go into another, but some people are expecting this to be a tier 0 deck. It's really, really powerful, but I just don't feel like it's that unfair compared to Ishizu Tear. So maybe I'm wrong, maybe we'll see, but the deck is definitely the best deck, don't get me wrong. I just feel like it's not going to be to the point of Ishizu Tear that everything else is completely unplayable. The deck has more room for counterplay. It does have unfair cards like locking your zones, and it does have a Rise card to be able to macrocosmos your opponent. Yes, all that stuff exists, but again, it's not like something that is making other decks completely unplayable like the Ishizu cards were in the Tearlament package. So yeah, we can expect this deck to be really good, really expensive, because it gets the very high rarity treatment in Photon Hypernova, unfortunately. So if you want to play the best deck, you're going to have to cash out. So yeah, this deck is going to be the most represented one for sure. The other decks are all up in the air. I don't feel like there's any deck right now that could potentially become better than Kashtira, at least not yet. Maybe in the future when we get a new set and we get something better. But for now, this is definitely the best deck. Hopefully it's not another tier 0 format right after the other. We'll have to wait and see, but for now, I feel like these decks are the ones that are going to be the most represented, at least for the first few weeks. Maybe some people are going to innovate and come up with something that we don't even know exists really yet, so we'll have to wait and see. So yeah, that's the video, guys. Comment down below any other decks you feel like are going to be good. For the rogue strategies, there are so many good decks I could mention as honorable mentions that it's just really, really good. I feel like so many decks become playable again with Ishizu Tear being gone. So I leave it up to you guys to mention all those decks that you love and think are going to be really good down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.